And good morning, fellas.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
Mike.
to see you guys.
Morning, Mike.
It's now December, last month of 2020. And I think we're all kind of happy about that. So hopefully we've got better days ahead, but we continue our journey. Well, we're in our story, the Gospel of John. This morning, I just couldn't get past these two verses. I'm really, guys, I really try to go faster, but man, I am so excited about what I'm reading and learning. And so we're going to focus in on these two verses here. And I must say there's going to be quite a bit of content that I'm going to be given this morning, some new ideas and things, maybe not new to some of you, but it's all based on trying to understand what is going on in this story. And so you're going to obviously be getting it from my perspective, but let's just have some fun with it and look at this response by these folks here near Capernaum on the shores where they're meeting Jesus, and they've searched him out, and they're there for reasons that they are not fully aware of. That's where we've come thus far. So could somebody read verses 41 and 42? They're on the screen, or you can read it from the text in front of you on your desk.
Therefore, the Jews were grumbling about him because he said, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. They were saying, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down out of heaven?
Thanks, Art. We have read this text, guys, I don't know, hundreds of times between all of us on this screen. This is very, very familiar. But yet we're gonna take it and try to make it as complicated as possible. So first of all, introduction. What is clearly emerging, at least to me. And guys, I didn't know where this story was going. I'm responding to the story as it's being unfolded and told by John the Apostle. So, at least from my perspective, what's emerging are two very different ways of thinking. Not one, not three, but two very different ways of thinking. In the prior chapters, as we saw Jesus interact with individuals and groups, this difference was alluded to. Although, let me just comment, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but now as I'm looking back, I'm now seeing it. Okay, so that's my point. For example, the new birth dialogue in chapter 3 with the woman at the well. This whole thing, you're talking apples and oranges on how what Jesus is communicating using the common vehicle of water, but yet talking an entirely different language than this woman who is tied to her everyday understanding of water. Jesus uses that to try to take her to a new level of understanding. So this is a different, we saw a different way of thinking. Give me this water. And then he says, go call your husband. Okay, now then the other, that was chapter 4. But in chapter 3, again, this whole dialogue around the new birth. Again, talking about being born again. And Nicodemus is on tilt. Geez, how can a man go back into his mother's womb? You see, he's thinking, he is thinking in the way that he thinks from his context of experience. Jesus is not talking about crawling into the womb. He's making an analogy of a dynamic new change that must occur. but Nicodemus is filtering that through his experience and interpreting it the way he understands it. So those are two illusions. But here in chapter 6, the difference is being fully demonstrated. Now, again, I didn't know it at the time, but it's now how I'm interpreting. First, through the crowd's request for a sign, verse 30, he just fed them and they want a sign. That's just mind-boggling. And now with the Jews grumbling in verse 41. So the request and the grumbling. And note, this is kind of a side note here. And it's very apparent in the text. Did you note when Art read the text, John's switching to the term Jew? It's no longer the crowd. He's calling them the Jews. And, John has been accused of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic. But I don't think that's the case at all. John is Jewish. He's not pointing the Jewish people are the bad guys by any far cry of the word. He's a Jew. But in my mind, he's just reminding the reader that what is happening here on the shores of Capernaum, on the Sea of Galilee, is the same thing, humanly speaking, as was demonstrated in the wilderness as their forefathers grumbled at as well. It's not talking about their race or their religious biases. It's talking about human nature in general. And so that, at least that's from my perspective. So our jaws first dropped, and I use that term because I think that's what John is trying to get across, is how could these people who experienced this miracle of feeding of a mass of people ask him for a sign? What on earth? Where are their heads? That's why our jaws dropped. And I think John wrote it for that purpose. Our jaws were supposed to drop. And now, once again, we look at verse 41 and we think, God, what on earth are they grumbling about? with this dialogue and this, what Jesus is offering them, and they're grumbling. I find that fascinating, but I find it so me. I find it so me at the same time. It's not the they, it's the me. Let's take a closer look at this. And this is what I've really had some fun with. So I shared this graphic, or at least a portion of it, a week or two ago. And I'm throwing two different ways of thinking on the screen here. How the crowd thinks, and we've already talked about why I sublabeled it jungle think. So we're going to call it jungle think. And then what Jesus is communicating. I don't know if I have introduced this term yet, but we're going to use this term from here on out, called the mind of Christ. That is the other way of thinking. Remember, I said there are emerging two ways of thinking. In this exchange, Jesus has stated this: the crowd is there, standing before him because the Father has drawn them. And we've already talked about the fact that they are there seeking a sign. They are there for reasons that they are not fully aware of. And Jesus is stating there that the Father is actually drawing them. B, he receives them as they are. All the Father, all that are drawn to me by the Father, I receive. That is a very loose paraphrase, but he is receiving them as they are, not in full understanding. And then the third thing is his promise to them, his offering, I would say, to them is complete, and perpetual fullness. Again, using the tie-in common denominator of bread and physical appetite, he's saying that he's offering them a fullness that is in the now with the promise of future resurrection. I really want us to get that. Jesus is talking about a fullness, a life in the now. It is us that tends to project that out to a future time of salvation in heaven. He's talking about a now with the promise of a future resurrection. There's two aspects. So that's his offering. This is, guys, this is the good news. This is great news. It should have been great news, but it actually caused a grumbling. So on the other side, from all the things, the A, B, and C of it, in this exchange, the crowd focuses on two lines. They focus their attention. It's like they have micro laser vision on these two, verse 41 and 42, where Jesus says, I am the bread that came down out of heaven. That's the first line. And then they really tighten up their laser focus on the thing that really disgruntles them. I have come down out of heaven. That is where their laser focus goes. If you compare what's offered them on the right and what is happening on the left, of course, why this particular focus? And then secondly, and why, guys, are they grumbling? So that's where we want to go with this. So what I'm going to state here is from here on out, wherever here on out goes, we're going to use these two terms as describing as major headings of the two different ways of thinking. The crowd, the general population, the way that that would be the human, this is what I would call the default human way of thinking, the jungle think, that all of us are prone to because we're all human. The mind of Christ is what we see projected, demonstrated and projected through Jesus in the text. Now, I want to stop on this for a minute. This is what I've been dwelling on. These are what you're hearing are my meditations on this whole story. I'm using this term mind of Christ because it demonstrates a different way of thinking. And what really triggered my thought is the kenosis passage in Philippians 2, where Paul later, actually, I keep saying Paul later because when he lived, but actually John wrote it later. But Paul develops the theology of what emerged in the Gospels. And as he develops it and applies the theology to the local church, Paul writes in Philippians, folks, have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. It is clear. And that mind is primarily a humbling and a death experience, which on the other end brings resurrection. That is what he is communicating. And he's saying, folks at Philippi, this is what you are called to. Have this same mind of Christ. And so what I'm taking, okay, let me go on. In the book of Romans, Paul states that transformation occurs through the renewing of the mind. Now, I made the correlation between the technical term mind of Christ and what Paul is writing about in Romans. That may or may not be right. but it's the idea of the mind through the transformation of the mind, the renewing, or actually through the renewing of the mind, which I'm correlating to this mind of Christ, transformation takes place. There's something that's got to happen that's available. And I'm attaching this, how we're going to see Jesus interacting as the mind of Christ. These references and others are informing my understanding to what is happening in our story at hand. Guys, and I'll just submit this to you as my perspective, and you can take it for what it's worth. But okay, yeah, this we'll just leave it there. So observation one from the text. Well, actually, these are observations from life, and now I'm commenting. I'm trying to bring understanding to us regarding why the grumbling. Observation one. I am told that the human brain is primarily binary in how it processes and classifies information. Binary. Okay, so what do I mean by binary? And I'll give some examples in just a moment. It accomplishes, and this is necessary. This is not fallen. This is not evil. This is absolutely valuable in how we to navigate life. You know, this binary process, and I'm going to explain it here right now. And it does this through comparing. So example, you have a 1 as compared to a 0. And we know a 1 is not a 0 and a 0 is not a 1. And really, I don't want to go beyond my capabilities here, but my understanding is in the binary language of computers, this is how it works. Computers never make mistakes because they are able to decipher what is a 1 and what is a 0 and makes decisions based on that. And we'll just leave it at that. So another example is a horizontal line versus a wavy line. In our brains, guys, we know that a horizontal line is not a wavy line, and a wavy line is not a horizontal line because our brains are doing a valuable work of comparing. They're comparing two, and they're making the decision based on, based on the comparison that evolves from it. So there's number one. Observation 2 is because of its binary functionality, the brain has a hard time processing and classifying weightier matters such as these things like love, death, suffering, paradox. Wow, that's a tough one. Grace, guys, grace, God, mystery. These are subject matter that involve all human life, all life on this planet. Very, very important matters. And the brain, because of its binary functionality, has a hard time processing these things. I'm always looking for good movies. And I think one of the most profoundly good movie that addresses this subject is the old movie starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, and it's called Contact, and it's about Jodie Foster is a scientist governed by scientific law, governed by the binary science, binary methodology. And she has this experience that is overwhelming and changes her worldview in a moment. And there are two extremely powerful scenes in that movie. The writers of that movie, it was actually a book based on a book by Carl Sagan, and the movie's dedicated to him. But anyway, guys, I would highly recommend that movie to watch her transformative process from the binary, what in our tech, what our language here is this binary methodology, to what basically blew her socks off through this experience. So anyway, that's observation 2. And then these types of matters require a different and a deeper intelligence that is counterintuitive and therefore must be learned. And I don't mean intelligence that's learned by higher education, although that could certainly contribute, but it may not contribute. It's an intelligence that we learn through the process of being transformed in Christ. It's an intelligence that we gain as we live life, and as we allow the transformative process. It's this intelligence lies at the core of our being. It has always been a part of us, but it is masked under layers and layers of persona that you and I have built over the years. It's part of our DNA because we are in the image of God, and this intelligence lies at the base. What we see and how we see Jesus operating and interacting with the community at large is this mind, and I'm calling it the mind of Christ for our, for easy just reference. So observation 3 is that in addition, I think this is fascinating. In addition, and somehow related, I use the term somehow because I don't fully understand it, although it certainly echoes of Genesis chapter 3. This echoes Genesis 3 big time. In addition, and somehow related to the function of comparison, our brains tend towards the negative. Our brains tend towards the negative. We are quick to flag what is perceived as wrong. We much more gravitate, and I'm making a very general statement here, in our heads, we gravitate towards the bad news much more than we do the good news. We gravitate towards what is wrong, what I don't agree with, versus what I do agree with. And for some reason, and again, I think it echoes strongly what occurred with the man and the woman and the fig leaves and all that. And it's a beautiful correlation between the two, but we won't go there. So here we have it, an illustration of the horizontal line and a slightly inclined line, okay? Using the binary process, we know that the line on the left we would call straight. If we had a level there, it would be level. And as compared to the right, the line is not level. It is false. One is a 1. The one on the left is a 1. It's true. And the line on the left is a 0 because it's false. It's wouldn't be plumb, it would be out of level. And our heads tend to gravitate towards the 1 out of level. Or as in matters of human communication, here we go. We hear a statement, and our mind, our heads and our minds, we focus like a laser on what is wrong with that statement. Well, what is wrong with that statement? You may be, we'd say, well, your A is upside down. That's what's wrong with your statement. And that's how we tend to, that's how we as humans tend to communicate. Yes, you made a statement, but your A is upside down. That's the point. And that's pretty drastic. But then it goes where it's worse. Even as subtle differences, even subtle difference classify an error. Something is wrong. And here you have a statement, but your T is crooked. So we may have a comment. This is how we Christianize it. I mean, this is how we talk about it. Well, I think that author is a really intelligent author. He really writes good, but you know, he's a little off. He's a little off on this. And he's a little off on that. Who in the heck are you to say he's a little off? How in the world do we know? We make these judgments. Yeah,
late night cable TV.
Well, yeah.
Turn on TBN or something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
And guys, this is not because we are evil. This is because we are human. But the sad thing is that we go all the way through life and never recognize this. And we end up as a bitter old man, and I'm not talking about us, but just generalities. We haven't grown. We stopped growing when we were 18 years old because, by golly, I'm going to be right. And here we have a story before us that couldn't illustrate it more clearly, of this human dilemma. So here we have the image. I've already introduced this idea of the my belief in regard to our human nature, how we are. And again, it's very rudimentary, but at the core of our being, all human beings, because we're all created by God, we are in the image of God. We bear that image, and this intelligence lies within that core being of who all human beings are. However, what we tend to do is build persona here around it, because that's who we really are isn't good enough. And so we have to mirror off each other and learn from each other and compare. Through comparison, we build a life that kind of looks like us, but it's not who we really are. And all of us as human beings, we tend to work off the surface layer up in here. And that's why the ring of we interact with each other's by means of who we think we are. And that's not bad. This is not bad, not bad. It just is who we've made ourselves to be, but it also happens to be what's going to die when we die. What's going to remain is who we really are and who we really are. And the process of transformation in life is not so much, it's not an adding to or becoming more holy or better. It's a stripping away through the process of death and letting go that then really brings forth who we really are. And we become free to be who we really are. So that is my understanding. Now, I'm going to plug in at this moment this new term that I'm going to be using now from here on out for a long time, and I'm going to tie this to image of God. Because we're in the image of God, we can understand the mind of Christ, and we can reflect the mind of Christ. And I'm using Paul's directive to the Philippian people, the church at large: have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So, mind of Christ. As I read through John's gospel, I observe this. The religious authority, they're desiring to protect something. I see them as very protective. And thus, they are defensive in regard to Jesus and his offering. That's what I'm observing. I'm pretending I've never read the gospel before. And I'm seeing a people who are in the know that are defensive. They're protecting something. And they're protecting what they have built. They are protecting this persona, this community, this, not only their individual persona, but the community persona, what it ought to be. And they are in protection of that. And so therefore, Jesus is viewed as a threat. So here they are working from the surface area. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the blown up image of that part of that line, or that circle. And that line that they are working is that layer is protection. And thus, Jesus is not being allowed in because he's a threat. This idea corresponds with what we know about human need as explained in such models, and I'm using such models because it's one of many, in Maslow's hierarchy of human need. And I'm just going to use that as an illustration here as we move to the next slide. So Maslow's model, and it was devised in 1943, and it's one of many models, but in all models, there's an amazing correlation. Maslow's model, along with others, identify human growth as occurring in stages. Key idea there. It just doesn't happen all at once. There's stages. This means that a lower stage must be satisfied before one can perceive and function from the next stage. So what that means is, and this is Maslow's model right here, or at least his early model. He made a big step right here. This is huge. I tend to think there's more layers from here on up, but for just model sake, the first layer of human need is the physiological layer, and that would tie into here. And the physiological layer is that, what he's saying is that the first thing all human life needs is water and food. I don't know how, it's things to take care of our bodies. Physiological means bodies. We need those things, absolutely. But once those things are taken care of, we are then free in our heads to then function at the next level that he calls safety, right here. And that correlates to this idea right here, safety, which on the former side I called protection. That means we need to build a fire at night and to keep all the wild animals away. We need to have a shelter. That would be physiological, but we can't allow heresy in our midst from a Christian perspective. And I'd say much of the world is really operating functionality just out of this, trying to protect our turf. And we certainly see it right here in the text. Once our safety needs are concerned, then we could move to things like love and belonging. Our minds are freed up. We're not preoccupied with protecting ourselves. And then what in Maslow's model, it goes into esteem, and other models state it differently. We're not adopting Maslow's specific stages. We're looking at his as a model of how we function in stages. And until that stage is satisfied, we will tend to be in that stage, and we can be in these stages. You could live your entire life right out here and never move. In my model, I'm moving inward like this. So, but anyway, sorry. But it means that lower stages must be satisfied first before we can move to the next. And in my perception, this physiological layer is satisfied in our story, and where the functionality and the exchange is taking place with this crowd, and with the religious community at large, is this safety layer, because they view him as a threat. They are trying to protect everything they have built right here. Thus, they're not getting to the deeper layer. Jesus is communicating from here, and they have no idea. He might as well be from the moon. They can't hear it. When Jesus communicates from his core being with such phrases as, "I come down from heaven," the crowd, they are incapable of understanding. And thus they respond in fear, resulting in the need to protect. And here's my reasoning, is that what we don't understand, human nature-wise, what we don't understand, we reject, we fear it. And so when someone brings a different idea, and our first response, and we're probably not even aware of the response, we're responding in rejection because we fear it. That can't be right. And that's where we are. I mean, that's how we function as human beings. And so now let's tie it back to this. I've given you guys a lot of information, and I'm going to end it with this slide here today, because we're going to do a table time on this subject matter next time. But here we got the binary mind at the top of the screen. We got the 1 equals the true, and the 0 equals the false. And this, I'm going to put the text of 41 and 42 on the screen. And this is how these folks' heads are working. And this is how our heads naturally work, working from the binary mind. So in verse 41, so then the Jews were complaining about him. They're complaining because they don't understand him. He said, "I am the bread that came out of heaven." Okay, they don't like that. That strikes them as negative because their heads are moving to what is in their minds error. Now on the true side, this is on the true side. They're saying, "Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? This is true. This is correct. This is absolutely correct in how they're thinking. But then we come back and they do that bullet focus on what they're really torqued about is the fact he says, I come down out of heaven. So here, guys, please see this. Here is an example of the folks were right. They were absolutely correct over here. And this is what they perceived in their experience. They knew him. They knew his mother and his father, and they knew Jesus. But in their binary functionality, this over here has caused them to reject this, the whole thing. They could not see that they were half right and leave the rest out on the table. What they saw was the error over here. If this is right, then this can't be right. Can't be right. And this is where this is what causes all the problem, I'm using a generality here. This is what causes so many problems. This is why we can't get along. Because the way I see it is the way I see it. And if the way I see it is the way I see it, this can't be right. But in reality, guys, they're both correct. But the part they don't understand, they reject. And it causes grumbling. Now, is this not applicable to where we are as a nation? Oh, jeez, my goodness. It is so clear where we are in the church, where we are with our human relationships. The example could not be clearer. Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? Absolutely correct. But there's that word. But then how can he say, I come down out of heaven? Well, hey, guys, couldn't you just let that be a little bit and learn something? Incapable. Can't do it. Can't go there. And the only way we do get there is we got to die to ourselves over and over and over again.
That's a big deal, Mike.
Yeah,
that's huge. It's huge.
It really, and Vince, I had no idea this was going to go here. Out of 2 verses, could it be more clear?
Well, psychologists and these guys, they talk about negative bias being built into you from the beginning as a form of protection. You have to know what's wrong so you don't enter into an area of danger,
That makes sense.
But as and as a child, you have to know, where does the street start so I don't step into it, and where's the stove so I don't touch the burner, and you're very black and white. That's just how you have to live as a young person. But as you mature, chronologically or spiritually, as you mature, you have to be comfortable with the both. And Jesus is the kid that lived next door working with his dad, but he could be the bread from heaven too. And if you're his neighbor, it's like, come on, Jesus, I used to sleep at your house on Thursdays.
Yeah.
How could you tell me you're this guy?
Yeah.
Give him a minute, you'll find out.
Yeah.
So.
But in order to do that, great example, in order that to do that, it requires a dying. It requires of letting go of something.
Yep.
It requires a risk, a vulnerability. What, yeah.
Mike reminds
Mike-
me of
and
a couple
Mike-
of things. One is a quote from a devotional calendar that Max Lucado put out years ago. And most of you have experienced that. You come across one and it just really sticks with you.
Yeah, what is that?
And this was a calendar where Mary was speaking. And Lucado asked the question, I wonder if Mary ever looked at Jesus in the quote unquote kitchen at the table and said to herself, that's God eating my soup.
Huh. Wow.
Even Mary was wrestling with this whole thing of understanding who he was. And Mike, I think what you've gone through this morning is a really, really good model for explaining to people. And this, you know, we could take this and discuss it for days or weeks, but I think it's a really good model of the transition, both as individuals and as quote unquote the church, moving from the age of the church to the age of the kingdom.
Yeah.
The more we understand who he is in the now and in the complete, the further we can remove ourselves from all the walls and doctrines and rules and regulations that we've set up to make ourselves comfortable and feel protected.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, one of the things I thought about when Vince said we operate as youngsters with a black and white, right and wrong, is that we still have to operate that way in this world.
Exactly.
There are still black and white. There's still right and wrong. I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is that in order to really absolutely know what is right and know what is wrong, we have to get to the mind of Christ, because the world is trying to put into our heads and into our minds things that are wrong that they are saying are right, or things that are right that they are saying is wrong. And if we don't have the mind of Christ and we still try to operate out of right and wrong, then like I said, good becomes evil, evil becomes good, and right becomes wrong, wrong becomes right. So getting to that mind of Christ allows us to operate in that right and wrong kind of binary type of life, but it is guided by the truth, not things that this world says are true.
Yeah, good, Jeff. You got a really good way with words. It's not one or the other, it's both. We as human nature, we understand the binary process, making the judgments, but the point in this is that we need to apply a deeper, another intelligence. Think of it as another pair of eyeglasses first. Rather than jumping to conclusions, just allow the statement to be. You know, he says he's from heaven. Okay, rather than jumping to conclusions, that can't be. Well, could it be? And if we could just call time out for a minute and allow that statement to allow it to be on the table, allow it to be and explore it and to think about it without this propensity to judge it or find out what's wrong with it first. Ultimately, we already know how to vote. We already know how to categorize, true or false. We got that one down. What we don't know as a culture and as a civilization, this other set of lenses, this deeper intelligence lies within us, and it's counterintuitive, and it must be learned, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
an older pastor, more mature pastor that I'm familiar with has a phrase that he uses relative to this decision making and being aware. And his quote is, and it speaks to our societal condition and our condition at large. He states that bad's not okay until worse comes along. You can just think on that one a little bit.
What is it again, Dave?
Bad's not okay until worse comes along.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm going to think about that today. Yeah. Yeah. Well, fellas, it's 8:01 actually. Wow. And I ended up talking the whole time today. I gave you guys a lot of information. This is exciting stuff for me, and I hope that it really got your minds thinking about this. Next week, we're going to do a review, and then we're going to go into table time and kind of process it together. I'll have some questions for us to look at, and actually I have them now, but we're not going to look at them. So anyway, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
You too, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye now.
Thank
See
you,
you now.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
See you later.
Have a good week, everybody.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.